Hello, everyone. My name is Gabe. Let me let you in on a secret. It's really hard to put a conference together, so please give it up to everyone that's been doing a great job so far today. So, again, my name is Gabriel Valdivia. This is how you can follow me anywhere online, and I'd love to chat with you. I'm a product designer at Facebook. I've been there for 4 years, which is actually like 17 designer years. And for the last 2 years, I've been working on a team called Social VR. This team is focused on understanding what virtual reality can bring to the table when it comes to social interactions, basically. And today, I'd like to kind of like peel back the curtain and go behind the scenes on kind of the process behind designing both of the apps that we've launched so far, Facebook 360 and Facebook Spaces, and specifically how we consider input as a guiding principle for making our decisions. But first, maybe we should start with like why should we even care about VR? It's kind of a hype buzzword, and it's not quite in the mainstream yet. So maybe let's start with just a little bit about me then. So like many of you, I started my career as a graphic designer. I dealt in picas, I carried Pantone books, and measured twice and cut once. Then the web came along and threatened to kill print, right? So I had to become acquainted with HTML, CSS, and we're still keeping up with all the trends in that realm. Now, these websites quickly demanded more interaction from us. Flash entered the scene and conquered our hearts, right? We all kind of turned our attention to animation, prototyping. We wanted to make these user flows more interactive. Then the iPhone showed up, and it forced us to think smaller. We got excited about skeuomorphism and learned about pixel density and made a bow to design mobile first, right? Everyone does that here, right? Then after that, after a while, we tried to combine all of it all into a holistic practice, right, that would buy us a seat at the table. And not only did we have to think about aesthetics, interactions, user needs, but also business needs, and validating them all through user research. And that's what we call ourselves today. This all has happened since I started my career in design about 10 years ago. So in the past 10 years, we've seen content move from a newsstand to your desk, to your laps, then onto our hands. It seems clear to me that the next step is to remove the device altogether and place the content in the world itself. So by removing the abstraction between you and the content. So we call this actually immersive design. And that includes like AR, VR, MR, basically all the Rs. So anytime you hear something like that, it's basically dealing in the realm of immersive design, which is placing content or information or technology itself in your environment. And we're seeing this realized today in your phones through AR. However, this has two major limitations. One, the field of view, and two, the input. Because these experiences still restrict you to a rectangle in your hands, they can only aspire to be a window into another world. So they're not quite inhabiting your own world yet. This also limits the way we interact with AR experiences. We've developed a language for using our face as an input mechanism, where we like raise our eyebrows or open our mouth to interact with AR masks, basically. And in general, these experiences leave a lot to be desired and drastically limit the way we can design today. Even after we move past the phones and into our glasses, we all know that's coming. We still won't have answered the question of how do we interact with the technology? Like, how do we actually impact the technology in front of us? Because we know that we're certainly not going to be tapping phones to do that, and we're not going to be opening our mouth to like check our email. So I think that's where VR comes in. I believe that VR is the best way to explore immersive design those challenges present in AR today, while taking advantage of a more immersive field of view and more natural gestural interactions. So these are challenges like thinking in 3D and weaving volumetric UI into the world that reacts to your environment and the people in it, while also solving people problems. So it's not a perfect simulation, but it opens a bunch of questions of what immersive design can be and how people will interact with technology in the future. So the question is, how do you design for VR, right? As a design community, we're really exploring what this means so far, and we're far from having all the answers. So I'm happy to stand here and share some of the things that we've learned today. Keep in mind that in the future, in the near future, this might not necessarily be true. And we're still in the early days, so we're learning every day. So as designers, we're often told to get out of the way, to be content first, and make room for the reason people are using your product in the first place, right? However, in VR, this is kind of a different question. VR poses a different question here, and which is like, what is content in VR? Where does the line between content and UI start and end? If we model virtual reality after actual reality, then we can look at the real world examples for this. For example, the savannah, which is like the oldest of interaction models. We can see everything, content invades the space, objects in the present are close at hand, the future is on the horizon before us, and the past is behind. Similarly, the shop, right, like the savannah, the shop implies a space that you can move around in, but with a higher level of density. Content can be locked to the walls or planes inside of a space. Both the savannah and the shop were designed, either by nature or store clerk. And in VR, the designer can be nature, the store clerk, the architect, the weather, and everything that defines the rules of that space. Now, this can be a lot to take in for a single role. So designers end up doing what we do best. We just connect dots. We work with many specialists to define, conceptualize, and execute an experience. That means collaborating with experts in 3D modeling, sound design, prototyping, and engineering to quickly explore ideas, then take them through user research to validate them, then rinse and repeat. So today, I'd like to talk to you about the process behind two of those apps, Facebook 360 and Facebook Spaces. We're going to start with the first one. Facebook 360 is the first Facebook VR app that we launched. I was the lead designer, and I teamed up with another VR designer to conceptualize the app, pitch it to executives, and eventually get it greenlit to be shipped as an MVP. The entire process took about 9 months, and it really required a lot of ramp up from everyone on the team. Most of us have never worked in VR before and come from different backgrounds, and the whole medium is really new. So to get started, here's a short video of some of the design elements of the app. So input became is a fundamental consideration when thinking about the UX of the app. This is how we felt dealing with input, working with that app. So as you saw, Facebook 360 is an expression of Facebook in VR, and we had to explore what a feed looked like in VR, what the abstraction of content is in VR, what a thumbnail is, and like what is a story card, and how that atomic unit can carry through different surfaces. But input was kind of the thing that led us on this path, and the main consideration for basically most of our design decisions. So we've all grown accustomed to clicking, tapping, and swiping to interact with products. And this is largely dictated by the hardware. You know, we have mouse and a keyboard, and recently multi-touch screens. However, in VR, input changes dramatically depending on the hardware. So unlike other VR purists, we think of VR as a spectrum at Facebook. And as you can see, input richness varies heavily depending on the platform. On one side of the spectrum, we have phone-based interactions like 360 media and what you see in AR today. And as you move to the right, a bunch of input possibilities start unlocking. And basically, you can summarize this as three basic types of input for head-mounted VR devices. We have gaze, 3 off, and 6 off. I'll explain what those mean in a bit. So let's start with the first one, gaze. So for Facebook 360 specifically, we decided to focus on the Gear VR platform because that's where most people were spending their time in VR at the time. That means we had to design an experience that worked primarily for gaze-based interactions. Now, gaze is what puts you at the center of the experience. It plays a very important role in feeling immersed, and it can also be leveraged to manipulate the interface. But unlike this guy who's like having a blast, right? Most people don't actually experience VR in a swivel chair. Most people actually are sitting in the couch with limited 360 movement. So we had to design basic interactions like scrolling simply by gazing. So for example, here you can see that the further a user looks left or right, it will scroll faster to direct their attention back to the center and kind of prevent people to go on a 360-degree angle. We also redesigned key Facebook interactions, like reactions, to be at home in VR. So placing the UI near the reticle in a circle would be much more comfortable than in a straight line like it is on mobile, which would require the user to make more dramatic movements with their head. So once we understood the input limitations, we set out to sketch a few ways we could visualize a feed in VR. And a lot of us were skeptic of the trends at the time, where we're just like a bunch of rectangles in space. We're like, we can do way better than that, right? So we discussed a bunch of different ways that you could experience content in VR. And everyone that thinks of Facebook in VR, the first idea usually that comes to mind is like, what if it was a village that you could walk through and every profile is a house? So we tried that. We tried a bunch of different ideas. And we created this kind of like immersion spectrum. And on one side of the spectrum, we have typical greater rectangles in space. So something that's familiar, but not terribly exciting. And in the other side of the spectrum, we have a browsing mechanism that pulls you right inside the content and moves the UI out of the way. So we prototype all of those, and this is the part where I show you some really raw prototypes, so bear with me. So this first one is an idea that uses cards in space to show the metadata for each story. And you can see here how we're like starting to develop a language for prototyping in VR. This is one of the first prototypes we ever did. We use black and white to delineate like a wireframe and preach the motto of put it on your face, which means that unless you experience something in VR, you can't provide feedback or give any sort of critique. Because a lot of this looks very different in VR than in the 2D screen. This other prototype was something we call the command center. And here we explore a gaze-based navigation where multiple sections of a feed were delineated by color spheres. And hovering over them would transition to them, right? So you could basically navigate, again, using only your gaze. Now in this prototype, we use gaze-based pagination, so the user could browse content without having to tap any buttons. And something that really resonated with people was this parallax effect that you might see. People really felt like they were like peeking into another world, and that's something that we wanted to capture and pursue. This idea of like teleportation and inhabiting other worlds. So this became kind of a signature design element of the app. We use your gaze position to pan around the preview as if they were looking through a window. So then the next question is like, how big should these tiles be? Like the bigger they are, the more immersive they are. But some people felt like claustrophobic. They were like surrounded by content. Everything was really big in their face. So we created this prototype that allowed users to change the size of the grid and ask them to choose the size that was most comfortable. So this helped us define just the right size for each story card, which created a pattern that we can then take into other apps like Facebook Spaces and even Oculus Home. So the result, spoiler alert, is a grid of rectangles in space. Which is something to be said about respecting kind of like the reasons why we landed on the paradigms that we have. They're familiar and they don't make people think, right? They can just focus on the content, like we said. And once inside, you could cycle through automatically in order to support kind of a lean back experience in VR that always shows interesting content for users. Another thing we tried was the way you play back media in VR. So we spent a lot of time thinking about a comfortable way to use media controls with gaze only. This is an early concept where users could skip to another piece of content by simply looking down and dragging the reticle to the left or the right. And again, you don't need any sort of tapping or interaction other than looking. So this iteration kind of revealed a linear scrubber, which was more intuitive for people. And if a user would look past the end of the scrubber, they could skip to that story. So you can see a preview of the next story at the end of the scrubber. And although these concepts were clever, we learned they weren't very intuitive. Users really just wanted to see a 360 story and didn't have the patience to learn a new interaction. So we landed on a more traditional layout for skipping through stories, but leaned on the scrubber interaction when users long press on the pause button. Although this requires some guidance, it was something users easily learn and enjoy doing during user research sessions. Now, that's just playing back media, so just consuming media. One of the things that's really interesting about VR is your ability to have agency on the media that you consume. Like, what can you do with this world that you're inhabiting, right? So we're really excited about giving people novel ways to interact with media. This prototype allowed users to take a 2D photo out of a 360 photo and share that on Facebook as a different remixed piece of media. So we played around with this idea of tools that you have that you can pick up and use in whatever environment you may be. One of my favorites is the reaction slingshot, which allowed people to throw reactions into the scene. Yeah. So the idea here is you can like a specific piece of a 360 story. This is not me infatuated with myself. This is my coworker who's now liking my wife. Anyway, moving on. The next step is 3DOF. These were some explorations that we made for gaze-based interactions. It's something that you can control only with your eyes or the way where you look at. And the next step is 3DOF. And DOF stands for degrees of freedom. That means that a controller can swivel left and right, tilt forward and backwards, and pivot side to side. So in addition to that, the controller also includes a trigger button and a trackpad that supports swipe gestures. So these are all kind of tools that we have at our disposal to interact with the UI in front of us, right? So we spent a lot of time trying to understand what we could do with these tools. And this is a quick prototype where we use the shake gesture to reveal UI around the controller. We wanted to see if it would be comfortable to show something around the controller, and that could anchor all the UI in the scene. That felt like something we really wanted to explore. And this prototype, we test having the playback controls around that trackpad itself. We use the remote to provide a fairly accurate tracking of your thumb, and we have a blue glow to show you in VR where your phone is resting in real life. So you kind of get a sense of how you're affecting the UI. And then finally, this prototype leverages what we learned from showing UI around the controller to easily navigate through content. And we show you a preview of the next story, right, when you hover over that content. And here's a version of that slingshot prototype that I showed earlier that is kind of anchored around the controller. So by pressing the trigger, you reveal the reactions, and you can swipe left and right to select a reaction and throw that into the space. So this is how we design UI with the main input as the main consideration. Now finally, we have 6 DOF controllers. And again, DOF, degrees of freedom. That means that there's 6 now. So you can move left, right, up, down, forward, and backward, in addition to doing everything a 3 DOF controller can do. Some controllers even include sensors that can detect different hand poses, which opens up a lot of possibilities for design. So things get really interesting once people start having hands in VR. Suddenly, you want to like touch and grab things. And having hands is a key component for feeling body presence in VR. The feeling that you're there, physically present in the non-physical world. What your eyes are seeing, what your ears are hearing, everything is telling you what's around you is real, so you believe it is, right? Now, yeah. So this is key for social VR, for a social VR experience, right? To really feel like you're there. And that's where Facebook comes in. As you know, we're pretty interested in social. And that's our first foray into that is Facebook Spaces, which is kind of an experimental playground where we explore how to convey identity in the virtual world and break geographical barriers to enable same-room social interactions between 2 or more people that may be miles away. So from there, you can decide what you want to do together. You may want to watch videos, draw in 3D, take selfies, go live, or any other stuff. So here's a small video that we made to introduce the product when it first launched in April.
Hey sis.
Hey Jack, are you all excited for our trip?
Yeah, and look what I found.
This is so cool. Is this the same spot we're going to?
I hope so. And look, I think that's where we're taking the boat tour.
Oh, I love it. Look, I'm gonna go chat with Melissa, but you're setting up the party room, right?
Yeah, I got it.
Great, see you later, Jack.
All right, see you later.
Bye. Hey girl, guess what?
What?
I got the apartment.
Wow, nice. Look at your balcony.
I know, it's amazing. No roommates. I have it all planned out. The lucky blue couch.
Yes.
This table with this floor.
Perfect. Jack keeps calling me. Can we talk later?
Sure.
Bye.
Surprise!
Happy birthday!
Thanks, you guys.
Happy birthday.
No, stop, don't I don't like this song.
Okay, hold this balloon. You know we gotta do it. Birthday selfie!
Oh my God.
Don't forget your birthday hat.
That's a good one. Hey, my birthday hat.
So there you go. So not quite the Matrix. Not quite the Matrix, but we're getting there. And the idea here is not to replace your social interactions, but to give that opportunity for people who may not get it otherwise. So people that live far away or people that benefit from doing it virtually. So when we launched Spaces, we relied on known 2D design paradigms to interact with the app. You saw a lot of things here. You saw cartoon versions of yourself and drawing in space, but a lot of the UI that allowed you to do that was 2D, basically. It was just flat planes. And we use them because they're familiar and, again, doesn't require users to learn a whole new way to interact with technology. But as we're thinking about the future of immersive design, we're experimenting with using volumetric 3D tools to better use what VR can offer. So think about the camera or the slingshot that I showed earlier. For example, this is the interface for editing your avatar in VR. It's simple, and it borrows from game design UI to create a familiar interface. But what if users could directly manipulate the features with their hands? So here you can see a sketch I quickly made on an iPad Pro to illustrate an approach that uses skeuomorphic tools as entry points. So for example, to add makeup to your avatar, would use a mirror that when you pick it up would zoom in to the portion of your face that's most relevant, right? And to choose lips color, it would zoom out into your mouth and then provide you with different presets to allow you to paint it yourself. So we could take a familiar object and enhance it in virtual reality to make the task more fun. Similarly, for choosing your hairstyle, you could pick up a tool like a blow dryer and augment that to do much more than drying your hair. It could make your hair longer, shorter, curlier, straighter, right? It could also do this in different parts of your hair, so you could craft your hairstyle just the right way. So you can see how relying on volumetric tools in VR can enable natural interactions instead of cycling through hundreds of presets in a 2D interface. Now, like 2D mocks are not enough to really express this design. You're left wondering, like, how does this feel? Like, how big is it? How does it react when I pick it up, right? Like, this alone is not enough to, for you to be sold on that idea. So we found ourselves using a tool called Google Blocks to create low-fidelity 3D models in VR to get a feel of the size, and then combining that with, clever video editing tools to convey flows and interactions. So it's not quite a perfect flow, but it's been really helpful to start thinking in 3D for designers like me who come from a 2D background. So in this example, you can see that mirror concept that I showed earlier used to navigate and edit different facial features. And you can even grab other tools and see how that would work. And it's still not quite realistic. This is an abstraction of it, but it gives you a sense of how that would feel. And if you try that in VR, you get a sense of how big these things are and what you can do to interact with them. And how do you rotate creepy little heads. So this has really influenced how we think about the design process by really embracing low fidelity. We don't yet have the luxury of UI kits or design systems to rely on for working in VR. And designing in a 2D tool like Sketch usually can lead to 2D solutions, which are really not great in VR. So we all bought iPad Pros and a pencil and have been sketching again, drawing storyboards for a particular interaction like you saw earlier, then jumping into a tool like Unity to quickly prototype it and test it with the users. Based on those findings, we may go back to ideating in low fidelity until we land on something we like. Then we move to define, and this, as a result, we typically have kind of like a North Star for the solution. We break that up then into executable chunks or phases and finalize the details like the iconography, the scale, color, etc. And then we create a spec doc that we consult with cross-functional partners. So then we talk to 3D modelers to create the final 3D tools, the 3D models. We talk to sound designers, engineers, and sometimes it requires a more robust prototype, so we talk to them. But this roughly translates into 4 phases of VR product design: ideate, prototype, define, and implement. Now, unlike mobile and traditional 2D design, we find ourselves skipping high-fidelity mocks entirely and jumping from a sketch on a whiteboard or on a napkin or on an iPad into a prototype and spending most of our time designing and iterating in VR. So stepping into VR is really placing a bet that the future won't be confounded by the boundaries of a rectangle, or a device, really. And actually executing on that bet will take some time. So in the future, we'll look back at VR designers today, similarly to how we looked at designers for the Palm Pre or the early Nokia phones. It's not a super flattering job, But that is to say that our work consists on finding the patterns that will be seen as obvious in the future. I mean, the dream is that we can stumble into a pattern like pinch to zoom or pull to refresh of VR. These things are so obvious that they're invisible. You don't even think about them anymore. So if you're willing to place that bet, now really is the time to get started and kickstart this industry into the mainstream. We created this site to document our learnings along the way. We have a few articles and some resources to get started if you guys are interested at all. The barrier to entry is actually pretty small. The tools are free, and the quality bar is pretty low. And I think because we need designers to come at this from a designer point of view, from a methodological point of view where you think of a problem and try to solve that problem, right? And that type of thinking is not very present in VR, and there's very few people that are working in VR experiences that are not games or like storytelling tools. If we're thinking about actual products that solve people problems, that pool gets even smaller. So yeah, you can go to facebook.design/VR. You can email me, call me, come to my house. My name is Gabe. Thank you.